I do think it's a question that we've all got an opinion on, and we can all agree on at least one statement. We're going to get a quote up here from a guy called Bruno Mars. Who's heard of Bruno Mars? Okay, the singer, the dancer, all-round kind of cool guy. And he says, "It's all right, buddy. No pressure." I might just tell you what he says. I'm going to tell you what he says. He says this: "I think success is having fun." I think that success is having fun. Now, you might not put it quite like that, and you might want to nuance it and say there's other things that kind of equates with a successful life, and you might say that the word fun, it's a bit of a strange word, isn't it? It's a kind of a word that young people use, kind of little people. This is such a fun thing to do. It's a bit of a kind of childish word, a bit. But I think we can all identify with what he's trying to say. If life is working, if life is going well, then life will be enjoyable for us, won't it? It will be pleasurable. It will be fun. That's why you want that job. Presumably that's why you've studied the course that you've studied. That's why you're interested in that person. Maybe that's the reason why you join the clubs that you join, because you think those things are fun. They'll put a smile on your face. It's an odd person, isn't it, who isn't motivated by fun at some level. But at some level isn't motivated by the pursuit of enjoyment. And it's at this point that Christianity has a PR problem. Historically, it's got a PR problem. This is a sign from the 17th century. If you know anything about history, you know that in the 17th century, both here and across the pond in America, Christians got Christmas banned. It's hard to read, but it says here, "A public notice, the observation of Christmas having been deemed a sacrilege, the exchanging of gifts and greetings, dressing in fine clothing, feasting and similar satanical practices are hereby forbidden, with the offender liable for a fine of 5 shillings. If there's anything that is fun, it's Christmas. And Christians say, no, let's stop it, let's kill it. But it's not just a historical problem. It's not just a thing of the past. You'll know this character, the international figurehead for all things Christian. And what's Ned Flanders like? He's sickeningly nice, utterly annoying, and totally boring. And because of Matt Browning, many people think that that's what Christians are like. Actually, if you Google it, there's been academic research showing that because of Ned Flanders, Christians struggle on dating agencies. That's another thing altogether, anyway. It's a PR problem that the media is kind of propagating. But it's not just a problem that we can blame the media on. This is a photo of me many years ago. It was in my 3rd year, and this is a survivor. It's about 4 a.m. This is a survivor's photo from one of our legendary parties on Sheringham Road in Nottingham. And this is me with some of my flatmates and some other hangers-on. And I'm still mates with these guys. Went on holiday with them only last year. I love them dearly. All of them aren't Christians. And it was interesting seeing, but that's my hair, by the way, not a spider. It was interesting seeing the difference between me and them. So they would get drunk kind of fairly regularly. They kind of did some substances which weren't entirely legal, some harder than others. They were all kind of sexually active, some with each other, which was sometimes awkward. And I wasn't. And I always wonder, what did they think of me? We never actually had this discussion. We've talked about kind of Christianity in a number of ways, but we never actually had this discussion. I wonder what they thought of me. I suspect I know the answer. I suspect that they just thought I was a little bit dull. Lovely, kind, generous. But because I was a Christian, I just had less fun than they did. The fact is that Christianity has a PR problem. And the thing is, it's not entirely unjustified. It does seem that God is anti-fun. And I guess you think that I'm going to try and persuade you that God is actually really fun. He's really great, particularly the Christian God. But I think before we get to that, and I am going to try and persuade you of that, before we get to that, we have to think about two important realities. Two things that I have to admit, two things that I have no shame in admitting. And the first is this: Christians have limits. Christians have limits. See, there are some Christians who either by their words or by their actions, they portray the fact that maybe Christians actually can just do all the same things that other people can do. They can get up to all the activities that everyone else gets up to. There's no real ethical difference that should be observable between a Christian and a non-Christian necessarily. You might find Christians who say that, or certainly who act like that. I think the only problem with it is that it's totally at odds with the picture we get in the New Testament. The New Testament says we're to be different, that following Jesus will make a radical difference in the kind of choices that we make. So I didn't get drunk at uni, or try not to. I didn't get drunk at uni, not because I was trying to earn my salvation before God, but because as a follower of Jesus, I thought that self-control was an important thing. That's something that Jesus teaches. And so I was different. I had to be different. And at that point you say, and there it is. Christians can't get drunk. How dull. But before you say that, there's another reality that we have to consider, which is this: limits can be great. Limits can be great. Did you know, up until 1951, there were adverts like this where doctors were promoting smoking. What does this say? This is it. L&M filters are just what the doctor orders. Doctors were promoting smoking until just under 70 years ago. Now, when the kind of medical industry changed their mind on this, do you think they were ruining people's fun? Or a more modern example, I guess many of us are thinking about the way we use our resources, and we're being encouraged to limit our plastic consumption and our CO2 emissions. Are the people who are promoting this kind of agenda trying to ruin our fun? Or I think about my trip to the doctor about 3 years ago, where he looked at some of my blood tests and he said, "Jonty, your cholesterol's a little bit high, and so I want you to slightly alter your diet in order that you don't have to radically alter your diet in the coming decades." Was that doctor trying to ruin my fun? Well, yeah, kind of. I love cheese. Now I have to eat a little bit less of it. But his aim wasn't to ruin my fun, was it? He wants my health and my happiness and my long-term enjoyment of life. And so we have these two realities. Yes, Christians are limited, but some limits are good. Some limits are imposed on us by people who have a greater knowledge of what's good for us. Some limits promote other things apart from just kind of raw, instant fun, things like health and justice and goodness and wholeness. Some limits are a trade-off against kind of temporal, immediate, the kind of buzz of fun, over and against long-term, sustainable, high, deep, lasting fun and joy. Some limits are good. So I actually think the real question tonight is, are Christian limits good? Christians are limited. Some limits are good. And the question is, are Christian limits good? And it's my conviction that they have to be. They have to be good if you know the person who gives them, Jesus Christ. And we're going to have our reading from the Bible now. Hopefully you've got one of these red books. If you haven't, put a mitt up in the air and someone will kindly pass one to you. We're in John chapter 2, which is on page 1064. And Jofi is going to come and read it to us.
John chapter 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 liters. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Thank you very much, Jofi. This little account is a historical account written by one of Jesus' best friends. And at the end of his account, he's very explicit. He wants to convince everyone who reads his gospel, as it's called, that Jesus is God. But more than that, particularly in this little passage here, John wants to convince us of two incredible claims. And the first is this: that God is serious about fun. God is serious about fun. I wonder if I asked you, what was Jesus like and what did he do? I wonder what kind of things come into your mind. I guess you managed a man who went around preaching, a man who went around healing people, a man who went around exercising people, and a man who eventually died. But I wonder if any of you think of a man who went to parties, a man who enjoyed a glass of wine, a man who loved to laugh. Listen to how his opponents spoke about him. They said this in Luke chapter 7, verse 34, if you're interested. "Here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." I'll read that again. Talking of Jesus, they said, "Here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." And I think it's a challenge to some Christians. You don't get this kind of reputation from spending too much time in the library, do you? Jesus enjoyed a party. He enjoyed feasting and laughter and dancing. I wonder if that's the Jesus that you know, the Jesus that you follow. So we see here in John 2, when he was at this party, and the party seems to be fizzling out. It's this wedding banquet, and they've run out of wine. What does Jesus do? Look down at verse 7 for me, if you've still got it open there. He speaks to these servants and tells them to fill these jars of Canaanite water, just ordinary tap water. And then he converts these 6 enormous jars into some of the best wine that the wedding guests had that evening. Look what the master of the ceremony says in verse 10. "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheap wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best till now." I mean, it's phenomenal that he could do this. John was there when it happened. He saw about 600 bottles worth of water turn into wine just because of the mental processes of one of the people who were there. I mean, it's phenomenal for you kind of chemists. He changed the chemical structure of this liquid just by his desires. It's kind of the thing that only the God of the Old Testament, the God who speaks things into reality, could do. It's awesome that he could do this, but tonight I want to say it's awesome that he would do it. Put your hand up if you like wine. Not everyone likes. Put your hand up if you like wine. It's extraordinary to think, isn't it, that so does Jesus, so much that he made 600 bottles of it, about 10 times the amount that's in the co-op across the road. And John says, verse 11, that this is a glimpse of his glory. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed reveals something of the wonder of who Jesus is. See, fun is his territory. Fun is a reality that he wanted to be in this world. It's his domain. He's the one who created dopamine and serotonin, the fun chemicals. He's the one who created our central nervous system and our sense organs. He's the one who created grapes and hops and fermentation and steak and sausages and sunsets and smiles and laughter and love and music and memory and orgasms and Portuguese oranges, which are the sweetest oranges I've ever put in my mouth, and creativity and colour. Did I say orgasms? God isn't anti-fun. He invented it. Saying God's anti-fun is like saying Mark Zuckerberg's anti-social media. Like, it's his thing. And this is why Christians that trust Jesus, who think he's God, trust his rules for their life. Because they reckon fun's his thing and he knows what's best. That's the first thing John wants to see. God is serious about fun. The second is that God is serious about us. Let me read verse 11 again. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. John, sitting there watching people enjoying Jesus' wine and dancing and enjoying the wedding, realized that this was a significant moment. Not just because Jesus could create wine, not because Jesus was saving this party from ruin, or even because he saw through this that actually this man could save humanity from ruin. For John, at this moment, he saw that this man could save him from ruin. And so he believed in him. He entrusted his life to following him. But why? What was it that John saw? I think it's this. When you and I think about heaven, we think about this, don't we? We think about overweight babies and stringed instruments. We think about kind of clouds, maybe a kind of everlasting church service. For us, heaven, okay, it's not too bad, but it's not kind of something I desperately want to do. But you know, when the Jewish people of the time thought about heaven, do you know what they thought about? A banquet with lots of wine and the best food you could possibly imagine. And do you know why? Because there's just loads of prophecies in the Old Testament pointing forward to a day in heaven, a day when God would remake this world. And the way that it's described is just phenomenal. Let me just read one of the best ones, which is in Isaiah 25. It goes like this: on this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats, the finest of wines. On this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. A phenomenal vision. This was the Jewish hope, the future for God's people. Feasting and celebration and laughter and fun. No sadness, no death, and no tears. And as John saw this party continuing, people laughing and drinking wine and enjoying themselves, he came to realize that Jesus did this miracle because Jesus wants us to be part of this future. A future that the miracle that he did was just like an advert for. It was just a trailer for. It was just a kind of sound check for. Just a little précis of what was to come. And a future that John would later discover that Jesus was so committed to, he was willing to die on a Roman cross in order that we might be part of it. He was willing to bear the punishment for the sin that we've committed in order that we might have access to it, so that anyone who trusted in him might be with him in that future. John realized that Jesus was very dead serious about our fun, despite the fact that we ruin our lives and we ruin other people's lives. And so he believed in him. And so he followed him. And so he obeyed his teaching, even when it cost him his life. But my time's up, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. The question we've been thinking about is, will God ruin your fun? I think if you ask any Christian, they'll essentially say, no way. No way. Not because there are no limitations on Christians. Yeah, we have limitations. There are things we can't do. But because we're convinced that if Jesus is God the Creator, then he invented fun and laughter and dopamine and Portuguese oranges. And if Jesus is God the Saviour, then he died so that we might know eternal joy and feasting. And if that's true, then anyone who's serious about true fun, lasting happiness, must be serious about him and what he says. My time's up. Why don't you just talk to the person next to you and see what they've made of the last 25 minutes. And see if they've got any questions, then we'll come together again. No, come on, anyone got a question? Yes, go for it.
Heaven sounds fun, and it's great that God is fun, he's a great creator. Why doesn't he just let us enjoy everything now?
That's great. So this gentleman here was asking, heaven sounds fun, but why doesn't God let us enjoy everything now? I guess I was trying to say that if there's something that, so say getting drunk, that's the example I gave here. If Jesus thought that getting drunk was for my best now, I guess I was trying to say that he would allow me to do it. But the reason why he doesn't allow me to do it is because he must think it isn't for my best. I was trying to say there's two reasons why we should trust him. First is because if he's creator, he knows how to operate it. So recently got a new laptop. I didn't know how to turn it on. I had to look at the manual to see how to work it. If he's the creator, if it can be proved that he's the creator, then whatever else I think or feel, surely he knows best how to operate the laptop, which is John T. So one, if he's creator, we should trust him. Two, if he died for me, that I might be with him in heaven, surely he loves me, and so he wants to say the right thing to me. And so I actually do think it's obvious why getting drunk isn't a great idea, but I might not think that or feel that. But at that point, there's two massive pieces of evidence that say, I'm going to go with what Jesus says instead of what I think.
We know that Jesus was accused of being a drunkard and things, but we know that he wasn't. How do you think, as Christians, we know where the line is between being involved in fun things, but not going past a point at which it becomes sin?
Great. So Evie was saying kind of Jesus was involved with kind of parties and things, and he was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton, but we know he wasn't. How does that work for us? How do we know the line? I guess with Jesus, they were accusing him of doing these things because they thought they had kind of higher moral standards than him. So the fact that he drank a tool, possibly, and certainly the company he kept, they were just trying to kind of throw mud on his kind of name. So yeah, there's no truth in it. And those who knew Jesus best said he had no sin, which is phenomenal, isn't it? There was not a day when any of his closest disciples could say he did something wrong. He did something out of the will of God, which is why he's able to die for us. What does that look like for us? I think we've got to be careful. So Paul gives us really good advice in 1 Corinthians. Everything is permissible for us, but not everything is beneficial. And by that he means we need to work out as individuals what will be good for us in terms of keeping us following God's will for our life. If God's will for our life is right, we need to do our best to make sure that we don't put ourselves in situations where we're tempted to go against that. So for some people, let's stick with the drinking thing for consistency's sake. For some people, they can have, let's say my limit at uni was 3 pints. I can have 3 pints and stop. That'd be fine. I'd be sober. I'd be able to kind of stay in control of what I was saying, what I was doing. I could still live in a way that honours God. For other people, they just can't stop at 3 pints. And so they decide not to drink at all. I spent a bit of time in Brazil where no one drinks because drinking is just associated with getting drunk. If you drink, you essentially do it to get drunk. And so over there, Christians just didn't drink at all. Different people regulating themselves in a different way in order to try and honour and kind of follow God's will for their lives. And so the short answer is you've got to know yourself. You've got to know kind of where you're particularly susceptible to do things which dishonour Christ. But I think the challenge of Jesus is not to be... We're not trying to be... We are trying to flee from that which is harmful, but also we want to be able to hang out with people, we want to be able to make contacts with people outside the church. We don't want to be in a holy huddle. And so there's a balance there. And I think we have to work that out with friends and other wise people around us. Any other questions? Sure, go for it.
We hear a lot that choice is good for us, and yet you're saying limiting my choice is actually better for me. I just suppose that cuts across what I hear outside all the time.
Yeah,
What do you think about that?
so at the front here, someone's saying, our society seems to be saying choice is good for us. And yet I seem to be saying actually limits are good for us. And I don't think anyone says choice, blanket, choose anything you want is good for us. I think everyone has limits, but they just put those limits in different places. So I guess with the green movement, some people are trying to say, actually, there are some things we shouldn't be able to choose for the sake of the rest of humanity. And I guess there are lots of sexual practices that the world says, actually, we shouldn't allow people to choose because it's not good for them or for society. And even people who say kind of, you should be free to follow your heart. They're saying that actually if if it goes against your heart, then you shouldn't. Everyone has kind of limits on what's good for you and what's bad for you. The question is how you kind of delineate those limits. And I think the best way to delineate them is having God tell me what they are rather than kind of me guessing or going with what my neighbour says. But everyone says there's some limits to kind of the choices we make. Everyone has limits. No one just says do absolutely anything you want. Everyone has choices. Everyone has limits even. The question is how do you draw up those limits? And the person of Jesus just seems, because of his deity, because of his love for me, he seems to be the best one for me. But I guess that's what we're here to think about, isn't it? Maybe we've got a question, time for one more, and then we'll call it a day. Let me just say, maybe if you think there's a 1% chance that Jesus is who John thought he is, the best thing you can do is come along to Christianity Explored and consider him for yourself. A very close second is to take a John's Gospel and read it for yourself. Maybe chat over it with the person who brought you here to see for yourself whether there could be any chance that it's true. Well, if it's true, if what he's saying is true, if what he's offering is true, then we have nothing to lose and a whole world of fun to gain.